Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwayne McFarland.
Hey, welcome in everybody all across fantasy land. This is the Fantasy Football Hustle. I'm Brian Drake of FightingChanceFantasy.com, joined as always by my main man, Dwayne McFarland of Establish the Run. Boy, do we got a show for you this week. You know, somebody on Twitter said, you guys have murderer's row of all these guests coming on here. Well, we got the cleanup hitter here for murderer's row tonight. It's Mike Clay from ESPN. You know him, you love him, you listen to him on the 06010 podcast. You see him Sunday mornings when you're setting your lineup on the Fantasy Football Now show. I love it, Mike. Thank you so much for joining us, taking time out of your day. I know there's a lot going on in terms of, you know, football and COVID and all this. So we'll get into all that, but just thanks for taking the time to come hang out with us on the hustle.
Well, I gotta be honest. It's the first time I've ever been called a cleanup hitter. So, you know, I was always, when, you know, growing up playing sports, I spent a lot of time on the bench. And if I, you know, my baseball years, my little league years, I'd be the guy that played, you know, not really right field, like right center, you know, when you were allowed to have extra players in the outfield, like wherever I could be buried, that's where I was, the last hitter, no power whatsoever. So I guess I picked the right industry to get that comp. So I do appreciate that. That's my takeaway from the intro.
Love it, man. And Dwayne, how's it going out there? What's going on down in Texas?
Man, I'm doing good. Super excited to have Mike on. I always get to talk some football. I'm going to talk some coaches. You know, Drake, near and dear to my heart. I nerd out on Drake all the time about coaches, Mike. So I don't know that Drake will be able to get a word in.
All right. That's all right.
That's not a problem.
Yeah, I'll sit here. I got a couple of drinks. I got a fridge behind me with some cold brewskis, and we can rock and roll here. And folks, off the top, if you're enjoying the show, subscribe on iTunes, give us a 5-star review, rate, review, all that good stuff. Go over to YouTube and search Fantasy Football Hustle. Hit that little red subscribe button. Dwayne and I will love you forever. And let's jump into things right off the top. Some newsworthiness in June, which is usually never a good thing, and it's not today either. Deebo Samuel, San Francisco 49ers wide receiver, with a Jones injury to his foot. He was working out. They say this could be anywhere from a 12 to 16-week injury. I saw Samuel being quoted saying, I'll be back in 10. I'm bailing like I've never bailed before. A wide receiver with a foot injury. This, if you've ever heard of a guy named AJ Green, this kind of should ring a bell here, because you don't want receivers with foot injuries. Trent Taylor on his own team had the same thing last year and never came back. So let me jump right in. Mike, what are your thoughts on Deebo, and if he comes back, is he draft worthy? And then where else do we look here in this 49ers receiving core?
Yeah, I mean, I dropped him pretty significantly to the tail end, right? The late double-digit rounds, or, you know, maybe the mid-double-digit rounds before kicker and defense. I mean, if you want to take a shot on him and you have a deep bench, that's fine, because once he comes back and gets settled in, he should be back in the wide receiver 3 conversation, if not the wide receiver 2 conversation. So that's the kind of player you don't mind having on your bench. But again, his value is going to change throughout the rest of the summer as we get reports on his health. But you kind of nailed it on the head, right? He may say 10 weeks and reports may be positive, but the next thing you know, you could have a setback, or he could come back too early. You know, there's a million things that could go wrong here, and honestly, not a lot that could go right other than him just coming back healthy. I mean, there's a lot of different things that could go wrong here. So on top of all that, you know, they drafted Ayuk. You have Trent Taylor coming back. You have Kendrick Born. There's kind of a solid presence for them. You have Jalen Hurd, who missed all of last season. Don't forget about him. He was a 3rd-round pick. They signed Travis Benjamin. They have Richie James. Who knows if Dante Pettis gets a shot. They drafted Juwan Jennings. I mean, they have a lot of depth at that position, a lot of guys they could take a look at and let Deebo take his time coming back. So I'm with you. I think he's probably going to go earlier than I'm comfortable with. I'm happy to stay away for now.
Dwayne, what do you think of Ayuk or Hurt, the kid out of Baylor, for this year? Any chance you want to take a shot on them in a redraft league? Best ball, of course, you can always take a shot. Who cares? But in redraft, do you want these guys on your bench? Do you think you'll ever put them in a lineup?
Yeah, I think some of it just depends on what happens to their ADP, right? How much do some of these things climb? I don't expect Jalen Hurd will probably start getting drafted in deeper drafts now. Maybe Kendrick Born does too, but Ayuk is the guy that I would expect to jump up the most. So it just really depends on where he lands, from an ADP perspective. So I think, if we look back in years in the past, if you've got a starting rookie receiver that has a potential to start off the year as, one of the top 2 or 3 targets, I mean, that's typically anywhere between a 6th and an 8th round draft pick. So it just depends, how high he gets. I wouldn't be taking him in the 6th, but I mean, I might take a shot in the 8th or the 9th or in the drafts I'm in where he happens to fall. So it'll be interesting, to see where he lands. And kind of like Mike said, I'm not quite sure what to do because they do have so much other depth. It's one of those deals where it's like we really need like training camp and the battles and to continue to refine, our approach to this group. So depending on what happens, as far as the way all of that plays out is also going to muddy our view even more of what's going to potentially happen here. And it could really literally just be a dart. I will say Kendrick Bourne did step in and he did, there's a lot of truthers out there for Kendrick Bourne, and he's a solid player. He stepped in, he did pretty well in the middle of the season. Last year he really became a guy that they not relied on. It wasn't like Deebo Samuel once, week 10 got here, he was averaging 16 PPR points a week, but he did flash and he showed a little bit. So my guess would be that, he would be one of the first guys up, on a lot of the depth charts as accurate as they can be at this point. You see that Bourne is the guy behind Samuel. Pettis, for whatever reason, as good as a route runner and all that, doesn't seem to matter. Kyle Shanahan, there's something going on between him and Shanahan that just doesn't seem to work. So, and yeah, I'm very interested in Jalen Hurd just to see what happens. He's an intriguing player because he can move everywhere. He can play running back, tight end, receiver, but I'm not sure they want to, run him out there all the time, or if they just want to use him more as like a chess piece. So we'll have to see.
Mike, something I want to ask you, because everybody kind of looks to ESPN as, that shining house on the hill, and you guys kind of lead the way in terms of fantasy content. You've got all the slickly produced TV shows and the rankings. Everybody in America is drafting off Mike Clay's rankings that they're, drafting a garage with their buddies having a beer. So what do you say to these guys in this COVID-19 world? How should they adapt their leagues, if at all? Because we don't know what's going to happen if guys are all of a sudden shut down for 2-3 weeks. Should we be adding IR spots, benches? What's your recommendation to the average fantasy player out here?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, I think if I'm a commissioner, maybe I consider adding an extra roster spot or two, maybe an extra IR spot, though. It depends on where your league is, right? Because some IR spots, if a guy is out, maybe he can't go on the IR. Maybe he has to be on IR to go there if he's, of course, out with COVID complications. So, again, you have to understand your league software. You have to talk with your league mates and figure out a plan. But I think the simplest way is if you're in a pretty normal league, let's just say for the sake of argument, it's a 12-team league. You draft 16 rounds and you essentially have 6 bench spots. Maybe add one more, just to add a little bit more flexibility. I know a lot of leagues probably don't even have IR slots. So I think that just adds a little bit more flexibility. Maybe you're more likely to lean on make sure you get your handcuff. Maybe if you take Zeke, you're more prone to get a Tony Pollard, something like that. So just keep it in mind. As for other adjustments, I've been getting this question a lot, like how are you adjusting projections for not having potentially a season? And the answer is I'm not, because, on one hand you could say, well, the quarterback and the receiver, for example, Jimmy Garoppolo and Ayuk are going to have poor timing, right? Because they didn't have as much time together. Well, you know what? The rookie cornerback that's covering him, he maybe, misses his route, makes a mistake, and Ayuk's wide open for a touchdown. So we could play that game all day. What's going to cause what? How is it going to be effective? We don't know, right? We don't have evidence we could use to kind of adjust things quantitatively. So if you don't have something useful, focus on things you can sort of predict and use that for your rankings and projections. That's at least the route I'm going.
Something we do have data on, and that is play callers. And you did a really cool article over at ESPN. And I tell anybody who's out there listening, go over to ESPN. Make sure you're using ESPN Plus. You can read Mike's work. It's really, really good. You obviously know that because he has 200,000 Twitter followers. But make sure you're getting in there, pay the money, help the guys over there out and read some of the best content in the land. You did a great article about reaching back to, I believe it was 2007, and finding OC tendencies and kind of saying, let's look at this and craft fantasy, mindsets around this. And this is something here on The Hustle that we like to do. So this is a perfect time for us to get into some coaching breakdowns, talk about new coaches. and new OCs and new places. So let's just jump right into it. And I guess where I'd like to start is in Tampa with Tom Brady. This is an offense that, with Byron Leftwich calling the plays, had a very high ADOT, but you noted very minimal shotgun. So there's a lot of people talking out here, Brady can't play in this system. He's not going to be able to throw the ball deep downfield and blah, blah, blah. I believe you have him in your rankings as quarterback 8 on the season. So give us your thoughts on this Bucs offense that everyone's going to want a piece of in 2020.
Yeah, and just to be clear, this is we're focused on the play caller here, right? So whether it's the head coach or the offensive coordinator, that doesn't matter. We're focusing specifically on the play caller for all 32 teams. And you're right, we went back to 2007, the NFL Nation team. We have 32 excellent beat reporters covering those teams. They helped me with this. It was a team project. They went through, at least in the sense of them charting week by week who the play caller was. So when you have a Rob Domofsky who has covered the Packers going back as far as you can imagine, or Rich Cimini with the Jets. I mean, the list goes on and on. They can go back and think on a week-to-week basis and use that experience to tell us who was the play caller for those games, not to mention the notes they have on hand. So taking all of that information, which was thousands and thousands and thousands of lines on a week-to-week basis, think about how many games that is, and then applying it to our data, was able to spit out all kinds of amazing information. That's kind of, I just went through it and I just jotted as much as I could into these articles and then kind of made the fantasy spin from there. So again, that's the important part though, is focusing just on the playmakers and the play callers, excuse me. And you kind of touched on one of the bigger ones, which is this Buccaneers offense and that kind of discussion around, will Tom Brady still be conservative like he has been the past couple of seasons in New England? And I think the answer is no. And again, this is one of the few times I went off of the play caller a little bit to focus on the guy that really designed the scheme here, the head coach, Bruce Arians, who we know has called a ton of plays over the past decade plus, because all of his offenses, including the one called by Leftwich last season, are very high on ADOT, near the top of the NFL. So I think that with all the different quarterbacks, all the different teams he was with, the Steelers, the Colts, the Cardinals, and now the Bucs, the fact that is carried over city by city by city, year by year by year, tells me Tom Brady's going to take shots downfield with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, whoever it may be, Gronk down the seam. It's going to happen. So that makes me feel more confident in Brady putting up big passing numbers a la Jameis Winston last season. Maybe not to that extent, but certainly more than we got last season.
Dwayne, we've always talked about Arians here, and it was over a year ago when we were touting Chris Godwin, right after the Super Bowl when Arians came to town. I took Godwin in the second round of a analyst best ball draft that Mike and I are both in, actually, for fantasy points. We'll talk about that, I guess, as we get down the road here. But I took Chris Godwin in the second round. Mike, at the end, because he had the first overall pick, took Mike Evans. Which of these two receivers would you rather have? And are you kind of just saying whichever one falls to me? And at those second round ADPs, are you on board with that in a redraft league?
Yeah, I'm on board. I mean, I'm assuming that we're talking, PPR. I'm going to take Godwin first. If it's standard, you could swing me back, to Evans. But it's still going to be close. But yeah, Godwin, I like the fact that he gets the protection, working in the slot more than Evans. They'll move everybody around some. So it's not like, just one guy gets to play all the time on the slot. I mean, they move them around. But Godwin is, just the role he's playing in and what that's meant. Again, just like what Mike was saying, you can literally go back year after year after year after year. I mean, Godwin did it last year out of the slot. Before that, with the Cardinals, Bruce Arians revived Larry Fitzgerald's career as soon as he left, and Larry didn't get to play in the slot and do it. And of course, Larry's gotten older since then. He's gone back downhill. If you look back to the Colts, when he moved Reggie Wayne inside, you go, back to Pittsburgh and what he got out of Hines Ward. Now, those are also all good receivers, but so is Chris Godwin. So to me, if you look back at that, and I charted it last year, I want to say like 9 out of 11 seasons, that I had charted for Arians, the slot receiver was actually the number one receiver. So yeah, I would take Godwin first, but I have no problem, with Mike Evans. I do think it'll be interesting, to Mike's point, Bruce Arians, and we've talked about it before, his ADOTs are always really high, 10-9, 10-1, 10-2, 11-3. And I love the way you said it, Mike, city to city, because doesn't matter where he goes. It's one of the, ADOT can a lot of times follow a quarterback, but it's interesting to see it follow a coach like this. I mean, where literally there's really not much variance from it. The lowest is like a 9.6 one year, and that was in 2011 in Pittsburgh. It will be interesting because, Brady, if you look at his ADOTs over the last several years, they haven't, been as deep. So will he take more deep shots? Last year, he only took 10%. And I think, to Mike's point, he will. And I think the thing that people forget is, Brady, while he's not as good throwing the ball deep, he's never really been, a great deep ball thrower anyway, per se, but he's still above average in many ways, across the league. Completion percentage on deep balls is it's not like a real predictive stat. It's kind of shaky year to year. But if you look at accuracy, you look at his completion percentage, like over time, it's not bad. And even in the last few years, it hasn't been terrible. He just hasn't taken a lot of shots. So it'll be interesting to see where they land. Maybe Brady has like a 9.5. Maybe it's not a 10.5. Maybe they meet somewhere in the middle. But I expect him, like Mike, I expect him to be aggressive and use the weapons.
Where Brady left was New England. And in Mike's article, he notes how Josh McDaniels is a guy who is very good at getting the ball to running backs through the air. We know that. We've seen it with James White and all these pass catching backs out there. And they're very high. He's one of the top play callers in terms of pass heaviest offenses. Now, Mike, do you think there's a value to be had in this New England offense? Because everyone's kind of just writing them off now, giving them up for dead. But Sony Michel, James White, one of these receivers, maybe it's even Stidham late in the best ball or something like that. There's got to be some value here. Bill Belichick's still coaching this team.
Yeah, exactly. And he'll probably make us look silly, right? Like, Ossie, the rookie tight end, will be like the second top 10 fantasy tight end as a rookie, over the past decade, joining Evan Ingram, right? Like he's just going to do something to make us look silly. So, obviously I'm keeping an eye on the values there. Nobody's overly expensive right now. Julian Edelman, as reliable as he's been, his value has been plummeting. James White, it comes at a discount. Sony Michel comes very cheap right now in the 8th round. I like N'Keal Harry as a late flyer. I've gotten him in a few drafts. He's going in the 13th. Remember, first round pedigree there. The guy, though, I've been taking in a ton of leagues. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe this is a bad time to do this podcast, considering you and I are in a best ball draft right now. But I've been spending my last pick or two on Damien Harris, and pretty much every draft I've traded for him in Dynasty as well. Again, a day 2 pick by the Patriots last season. It's not. I realize he did almost nothing as a rookie. That's not new for Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels. Rookie running backs rarely make much of an impact. Sometimes they don't play at all, and then they kind of break out in their second season. We've already had some reports about more injuries for Sony Michel, so there's an opportunity pretty quickly that Damien Harris could play a pretty significant role in this New England offense. And keep in mind, I know they use committees. That probably will not change, but as a whole, the running back rooms have had a ton of fantasy production in McDaniels' offense. Past 8 seasons, 6 of his running back units have ranked top 5 in carries and touches. 7 have ranked top 8 in total yards and fantasy points. And actually 7 of them were first overall in OTD, which is expected touchdown, an opportunity adjusted touchdown total, which means they're getting the ball a ton near the goal line. Harris can really do it all. So really a lot to like there. But again, you can get him so cheap right now. I love the value.
Let's talk about the teams that played in the Super Bowl last year. And everyone likes to tout Andy Reid and what he does for running backs. But you had some interesting points here in your article over at ESPN.com about the overall volume of his running backs being poor during his play calling tenure, but that's offset by this great touchdown scoring. So I'm seeing Clyde Edwards-Helaire come off the board, like the draft you and I are in the middle of the 2nd round. So I'd love to get your thoughts on the kid who went off the board 32nd in the NFL draft.
Yeah, I like him a lot. Edwards-Helaire was number 1 on my running back board before the draft. So I was, when he went to Kansas City, I was ecstatic, obviously. Just a great fit there with Reid. And you kind of mentioned it. Running back volume has just not been good. I pointed this out year after year with this Reid offense, that it really comes down to who is that feature back and who's going to benefit from the increased efficiency and high scoring of these offenses, because you just don't get the volume. And since he has been with the Chiefs, none of those teams have been top 20 in running back carries. One has been better than 14th in targets, and one has been better than 21st in touches. Think about that. Think about all the fantasy production you get out of Reid offenses, and that actually traces back to Philadelphia as well. Just the minimal volume from that position. But again, you get a lot of touchdowns. We saw that especially with Damien Williams over the past year and a half, we'll say. And I think Edwards-Helaire, and it's going to be one of the highest scoring offenses. He should be the lead back pretty quickly. His ADP is a little tough to justify, but I don't think it's terribly far off. I actually think Damien Williams is the ADP that's a little bit more of a head scratcher. But all in all, I don't think there's anything egregious in the ADP right now. Maybe certainly Edwards-Helaire just a little bit early.
Dwayne, I want to get you guys talking about one of our favorite coaches, and we've mentioned him probably on every show we've done, and that's Kyle Shanahan. One of the running backs that Mike has listed as an upgrade is Raheem Mostert, and he actually drafted him with his last pick here in this best ball that we're doing. So a lot of stuff to tie in here. Your thoughts on Mostert? Is he a lead back? I mean, this has been a committee approach for Shanahan for a long time here. So if people are going to invest let's see, Mike got him in the first pick of the 7th round. Give me your thoughts on Mostert, this running game. Are we too high on a guy who was, 3rd or 4th on the depth chart a year ago at this time?
If you're getting him in the 7th round, I think it's fine. I've just been in some drafts where he's going in the 5th, and that's a little bit rich, just considering some of usually I'm targeting a receiver almost all the time in the 4th and 5th rounds, just the way things are falling this year. So it's tougher then, but the upside, yes, Kyle Shanahan has typically gone, with a committee, but a lot of it is due to his running backs getting dinged up. And I think he's felt like he's had to do that. So if you have a shot of one of those guys, potentially taking over and truly becoming the guy, I mean, it could be huge. I mean, like you said, we've talked about the Shanahan scheme over and over and over on this, on this show, and what it can do for runners. You see the same thing in Minnesota with the Kubiak scheme. You're going to see that. We'll talk about Cleveland, I'm sure, in a second. I'm excited about what that could mean for their backs. It's just a great scheme, and he got a lot of it from his dad, but his dad used to do the same thing. But remember, every once in a while, one of these schemes does find a guy, Arian Foster. They finally landed on him in Houston, Terrell Davis, in Denver. So there's always that chance, right, that it could happen. So if you're talking about the 7th round, even the late 6th, I could see, and it depends on roster construction, right? So like this year, I love going runner if I can get a bell cow in the 1st, and then going receiver. In that scenario, depending on what I do with my next 2 picks, I like Mostert, as one of those 2 picks because of the upside he gives me, and I know that he has a role. So I get both. He has a role, and I could get the upside. It may frustrate me at times because Shanahan will ride the hot hand. We saw him do it as recently as the playoffs last year for a game. So, I mean, you're always going to have to deal with that. But I think there's enough value already baked in, plus what you get on the upside, that I'm good with it.
Mike, let's just get your quick thoughts on Shanahan in this offense here. And Mostert, I remember hearing guys talk about Mostert's going to be a 1st-round pick next year and blah, 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 blah. I mean, you got him at the start of the 7th. If this guy's your RB3, let's say, I mean, nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, nothing wrong at all. And look, I think we're all nervous that at some point he'll just disappear and it'll be the Tevin Coleman show, or maybe Jerick McKinnon gets another shot. Mm-hmm. Who knows? Someone, an undrafted free agent ends up, like Hasty or Ahmed, or, one of these guys ends up the lead back. I mean, it's definitely a risk in this offense, but this is a best ball, first of all. So I think I'm going to get some decent weeks out of him. And the other thing is, again, as a whole, these running back units for Shanahan are tremendous. I mean, I don't think people realize that he has had 4 top 10 fantasy campaigns from his running backs over the past 5 seasons. There's a lot of production there. They're always near the top in carries and rushing volume. The target volume isn't great, but the efficiency is terrific. He gets the running backs down the field. And look, I mean, Mostert's not going to get you a ton of targets. That's not where he's really shined, but the rushing efficiency, you can't argue with the yards before contact in this Niners offense. They have a good O-line. I mean, it's set up for success again. So, yeah, I'm a little nervous about him disappearing, but the guy has been a rock star since he got into the league. He was I really think he didn't play a lot of offense because he was so good in special teams, and he just kind of bounced around a little bit in that role. But he's always been efficient. He's always been effective. And I think he's finally got that job as the 1A there in San Francisco. And that's going to be good enough, I think, to get you borderline RB2 numbers.
Terrell Davis was also a former special teamer. If you guys remember that. What's cool about this is like just think of the two offenses we just talked about, and that's why I get so fascinated, with coaches. And I've seen some coaches that are much more willing to adapt, some that kind of have their, their MO and they stick to it. I'm sure you've seen the same thing, Mike. But if you think about Andy Reid, right? And we talked about how his back struggled to get the volume. And the biggest reason why is, Andy Reid is from a play calling standpoint, he continues to throw the ball even when he's ahead. So like last year, he was one of the tops in the league playing from ahead, still passing the ball 56, 57, 54%. Then you go down and you look at Kyle Shanahan, he throws the ball 45% when he's ahead, right? So two total different philosophies in the way that they manage a game once they gain a lead. And that's what, when you put Shanahan's efficiency together with the fact that, well, the 49ers are also really good right now. And so they can build leads and they have a defense, they can play that style. But if you look at those running backs, they get that opportunity in the second halves of games to really, gain those extra carries that you don't get from a Kansas City, offense. And then it's the opposite for the quarterbacks. That's why, Garoppolo, is going to be so up and down because you need him to be in a shootout. Whereas Patrick Mahomes, they'll throw it even if they're ahead. It doesn't really matter. So I think it's pretty interesting, like the order we went in, because it's just a complete compare and contrast. Both are very competitive offenses that can score points. But you really need to understand this stuff to know how to attack, a roster from a fantasy construction standpoint and how to handle projections.
Mike, that's why I liked your article so much. And I don't think enough fantasy players out there take what you put on paper here into account. They're not looking at, well, who's calling the plays? What are their tendencies? Is this team even any good? You've got guys taking flyers on receivers with awful quarterbacks. Like, don't do that. You've got, these run heavy offenses where, you got a running back who's never going to catch any passes. Like, they're not going to help you later in your draft. You want guys that are going to catch the rock. So I really like what you're doing here with this article. I hope people go out, they go to ESPN.com and they check it out. And I think what people need to check out too is right behind Mike is a Desean Jackson jersey. Right behind Dwayne over his shoulder, if you're watching us on YouTube, and why shouldn't you be, is a Cowboys something. Maybe it's toilet paper. Who knows at this point? But Mike, I am a huge Eagles fan.
That was the year Aaron Rodgers ripped our heart out with the pass to Jared Cook. I had taken my dad and my mom and my brother to the game, and so they had never gone to a playoff game for the Cowboys. Who has, basically, because most people that were alive the last time one happened is for a victory anyway. But yeah, so that was the game where the Cowboys came all the way back. And then Aaron Rodgers rolls out to the left. Jared Cook catches the ball at the sideline. They come on, they kick the field goal. Literally, it's like being at a craps table that was really hot, and all of a sudden, shooter goes cold and everybody loses all their money to the house. It was that exact feeling. Like nobody's talking, walking out. It was terrible.
Yeah, sounds bad. We're Eagles fans. We've lived bad our entire lives, literally until 2 years ago. But I'm
here to make you guys feel better.
I'm going to bring my autographed Randall Cunningham jersey over and just put it behind me in a second. But what I wanted to get to, Mike, is the Eagles wide receiver situation. And last year, their leading receiver that wasn't a tight end had 490 yards. Now, I'm not great at math because I have a broadcasting degree. That's not good. What are your thoughts on Jalen Reagor? Is he the one in this offense? Or your boy D-Jax, who's over your shoulder, he blew up week one. He was outstanding. His chemistry in camp with Wentz was off the charts. Is he someone people are really sleeping on and they're not looking enough at Desean Jackson and that he could have easily top 24 wide receiver numbers?
No question about it. Desean is a guy I've drafted in a ton of leagues so far. In recent MFL 10s, he's going in the 13th round. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that is a steal. Like you said, had almost 150 yards and 2 touchdowns in his only full game last season. It was clear he was going to be a big part of that offense. And look, he's going to be 33 here. I know that's a concern, but we're not drafting him as our wide receiver too. We're taking him late, and especially if it's a best ball league, if you get 10 games out of him as essentially their number one receiver, that could be a tremendous payoff. So I like him a lot. I think, again, he's one of the better values at wide receiver right now. As for Reagor, I mean, look, I'm going to be totally honest. As an Eagles fan, I didn't love the pick. I'm not a big fan, but receivers are one of the hardest positions, I think, to scout. I like to focus on running back because I'm pretty good at that. Receiver is tougher. It is. There's just not as much volume, not as much of a sample. But I had a hard time getting past how he just plummeted last year in terms of efficiency. 6.5 yards per target. He was under a 50% catch rate. Yes, the offense was bad. Yes, the quarterback play was bad, but he had drop issues, fumble issues. I mean, he made plenty of mistakes on his own. So that the kind of thing definitely concerns me. So we'll see how quickly he comes along in the pros. He should get a quick opportunity because I don't think any of us expect Alshon Jeffrey to be ready for week 1, but he may be back and play a big time role at some point. But right now I would take Jackson and Reagor late in my draft, and that's about it.
Dwayne, one of the guys that Mike is high on for this season because of the play caller, and we have the same play caller, new head coach in Dallas with your boys, Kellen Moore sticking around. Mike McCarthy comes in, the former Packers head coach. So he's very high on CeeDee Lamb. You and I were live on air when CeeDee Lamb was, and Mike, you want to see heartbreak? We're on air together, and we're talking about all the draft picks as they come off the board, and I'm dying, praying that Lamb falls at Eagles. I'm going to jump up to Denver, get the pick. And then when the Cowboys took CeeDee Lamb, like you would have thought someone just punched me in the chest. It was awful. But you're higher on him. So Dwayne, I'd love to quickly, you're the Cowboys guy. Give me your thoughts on Moore and the influence McCarthy's going to have on this offense, and then we'll talk to Mike about it too.
Yeah, no, I think this is one of those deals where the talent that's been accumulated perfectly matches with what we know historically the coaches wanted to do. So if you look at Mike McCarthy, he loves to run 11 personnel. He loves to target his wide receivers, and now he has Amari Cooper. He's got Michael Gallup, and then he's got CeeDee Lamb. So yes, Blake Jarwin, is a tight end, and he's going to be on the field too. But if you look historically at what Mike McCarthy's done, he hasn't really utilized the tight end that much. He had 1 year where he had a few years where in a per game basis, if you look at guys that at least played 8 games, where he had Finley, he got up into the 16% target range. But really, if you look at it, other than that, he's really been more about distributing the ball around to his receivers. The other thing is it's pretty evenly distributed, except here over the last few years where, he had to really depend more on, one guy because, the talent pool is just dwindling down. It continues to do that, around Aaron Rodgers. So I expect it to be pretty balanced. And I think, if you look at what Randall Cobb did last year already, he had like 14% of the target share on a per game basis. If you look at just the games that he played where he didn't have to leave early with injury, I think, it's going to be a good thing. And if I looked at McCarthy I have data on McCarthy back to 2008. And if you look at it back to then through 2018, he had 3 different times that he actually had triplets, right, in a PPR. So between receivers and tight ends, he had 3 guys in an offense actually get over 150 points, from a fantasy production standpoint. So he's one of the few coaches to have any kind of history like that, where you see multiple times he's gotten 3 receivers involved to that level. Now, you don't always see the top guy blow the top off. You still can sometimes, but it's going to have to be more from efficiency, with the exception of, Devontae Adams here recently. And that's been more, recently because, they just haven't had the other guys to go to. So I'm super excited about it. I mean, I can't wait to see what they do with these 3 receivers. I can't wait to see what it does for Zeke as well. Last year, Zeke saw way less of, 8 in the box. I think that's going to continue this year, and the opposing defenses are going to have to be focused on, what Dak and these receivers are doing. So, I'm a guy that, typically, like, I don't like to look at like, oh, this could be record breaking or anything. And I'm not necessarily saying that, but I'm not afraid to be really high on the Dallas offense.
Yeah, Mike, you've got CeeDee Lamb as wide receiver 56 in your rankings. Just your thoughts in general on this Dallas offense. Is Zeke's going to come off the board, coronavirus positive or not? He's going to be a top 3 pick in most every league.
Yeah, and 56 is probably, that makes him, by my rankings, probably not a great value, but that tier of receivers in that area is so large that I have no problem taking a shot there. I mean, you think about this offense last season, just so productive through the air. And, there's been a lot of, can the third receiver be fantasy relevant in this offense? And I think the answer is yes. I mean, if you look at last season, there were 13 games where Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and Randall Cobb played together in full, right? So we're not even going to give Cobb a bump here from games where the top guys were out. So with just those 13 games, Cooper and Gallup were both top 5 fantasy receivers those weeks. Randall Cobb was 31st. So we're talking wide receiver 3 numbers there. And now you have CeeDee Lamb, who's a first-round talent, was top in this class in yards per route run last season. I'm a big fan of him. I think he's the best receiver in this very talented class. So I like that a lot. And honestly, Dwayne kind of touched on this, but could this be a return to a pass first or even a pass heavy Cowboys offense? It's possible. I mean, that's what Mike McCarthy's background is. And keep in mind too, when McCarthy gave up play calling about 5 or 6 years ago, when Jason Garrett gave up play calling, before that, they were pass first. When he gave it up, they went to a run heavy offense with Zeke and during Darren McFadden's high years. But last year, when Kellen Moore took over play calling, they were balanced, right? They were just slightly on the run first side of the league. So basically a balanced offense. A.M. McCarthy and his 11 personnel background, his pass heavy background coming in, could they lean towards run first, be a top 10 team in that category, or pass first, excuse me? I think that's very much a possibility. So I'm with Dwayne here. I think there's a lot of potential in this Cowboys offense, and I think it can support 3 fantasy starters at that position.
We mentioned Jason Garrett. He's now in New York. Joe Judge, the head coach there. I think he was the water boy or something for the Patriots last year, but landed a job as a head coach. That's cool. So let's talk about Garrett. And people always want to laugh and make fun of the clapping and all this. But here's a guy that really, I guess, did like to throw the football. And, there's going to be viable options in an extremely talented New York Giants offense. We like to make fun of the Giants, say, they're not good or whatever. Their skill position players are outstanding. Led by, in my mind, Darius Slayton on the outside from that group, who is just a breakout star waiting to happen. So I'd love to get your thoughts, Mike, on the Giants offense and Mr. Garrett.
Question. And they were a borderline top 10 team in touchdowns last season, the Giants were, and that was with 0 games with Barkley, Slayton, Tate, Shepard, and Ingram together. 0 games together, not to mention Daniel Jones. Remember the quarterback changes they went through last season, whether it was injuries or a benching. 0 games together, still almost top 10. I think they were 11th in touchdowns per game. So now you bring in Jason Garrett, like you said, like I mentioned earlier, he hasn't called plays in a while, but back when he did, his 4 offenses from 2009 to 2012, all top 8 in passing yards and top 10 in completions and fantasy points per game. They'll find ways to involve Barkley. Obviously, I don't think they're going to be a crazy pass-heavy offense, but they should be able to support these wide receivers, Ingram, Barkley, and be a decent fantasy offense. So I think it's going to be really intriguing. And if you want to take that flyer in the double-digit rounds at Daniel Jones, especially with his rushing ability added in, I think that one may pay off.
Am I the only guy that doesn't care about his early season schedule? If I have to hear another podcast talk about Daniel Jones, listen, his first 4 games are brutal, but so what? They'll be losing. They're going to throw the ball all over the place. The guy's probably going to run for 70 yards a game and throw some touchdowns. That doesn't matter to me so much. I don't know. Am I on an island with that, or is that something that's I should be looking much more closely at?
Well, I mean, first of all, you're not drafting him to be your starter, most likely, right? Yeah, you don't have to draft him like that. I mean, I guess if you're just punting the quarterback position, you could take him and then just stream someone else if you want to. You're right that, if they're trailing, he's going to throw more and he'll be scrambling, and that's fine. They are playing Pittsburgh, Chicago, and San Francisco. They are pretty darn good defenses, which should scare you a little bit. But yeah, I'm with you. I mean, that's not going to move the needle a ton because their overall schedule for the season is not something that's so intimidating that he can't pay off. And again, when these guys scramble, it doesn't always matter as much what the opposing pass defense can do. If he can make up yards that way, that's going to pay off.
Alongside Dwayne McFarland of EstablishTheRun.com, I'm Brian Drake from Fighting Chance Fantasy. And of course, that other voice you hear is Mike Clay of ESPN. Follow him at Mike Clay NFL. We're talking a little fantasy football here on the Fantasy Football Hustle. We're going to go over to our chat room where friend of the show and host of the Worked Shoot Wrestling podcast, Corey Richmond's asking a question on the Cleveland Browns offense. And let's go there now, Dwayne. Kevin Stefanski taking things over. He was in Minnesota. We've got Kareem Hunt now taking snaps or Zoom meetings with wide receiver groups, and we've got everyone loving Nick Chubb, who was our guy last year. So let's talk about this Cleveland unit, because Nick Chubb's a guy you're going to have to make a first-round call on, most likely at the end of the first in your redraft league. With Hunt there, I mean, That's tough. I saw that. I lived that last year. Hunt wasn't there early, and Chubb was a rock star. Then all of a sudden, here comes Kareem Hunt outscoring him in PPR week after week.
Yeah. I mean, first let's start, with Stefanski's offense. And look, I think if you just look at the offseason moves, so Stefanski last year, really, the blueprint for that offense was really from Gary Kubiak. The year before, and Mike can probably break this down even easier than I can. I wrote an article last year just focusing on the games where Stefanski was the play caller with the Vikings, at the end of 2018 when they got rid of DeFilippo. But they got really run heavy, but it was tough to know if that was really where they were going to be again. We know Mike Zimmer wanted that, but they led in those games and they were blowing some other teams out. So we didn't know if it was just a nature of, playing against some bad teams. But then last year, you see what he did with Kubiak, and, it's 49% pass, 51% run, which, I mean, to give some context, I mean, the league average, typically around passing is around 58, 57% right now. If you're just looking at pass attempts, not looking at drop back, when you go to drop backs, obviously it goes even higher. So that's a really balanced offense. Now, what Cleveland will need for that to stick is they're going to need, to be ahead in games. So last year, Minnesota's average margin of victory was by 6.5 points, which is pretty healthy. They led for 47% of their plays, which is also really healthy. So it allows that kind of scheme to work. But this is really a variant of what we just talked about earlier with Kyle Shanahan. So from an efficiency standpoint, Drake, I think it's going to be great, for Nick Chubb. And it's hard to say, like, how can Nick Chubb be more efficient? What did he average last year? Like 5.1 yards per carry, already.
Could score some damn touchdowns from the 1 yard line.
Yeah. And
not that I was screaming at a TV, throwing beer cans at one last year, but that's cool.
I think that's something that you could see, right? What will be interesting in my mind around, coming to Kareem Hunt, is, what are they going to do with him? Because what I'm hearing, what you read on Twitter is, they're going to use way more two backs. No, they're not. That's why they brought in, Janovich. So if they're in 21, they're going to be playing with a fullback. They can also play 12, which is two tight ends. So they can get heavy, right? So that's what Minnesota did last year with Irv Smith and with Kyle Rudolph. If you look again at Shanahan and what he does with his offenses, he's always got 2 or 3 tight ends. He's always got a fullback. That's why he went out and got Juszczyk once he got to San Francisco, because he had a plan, for that. And so now Janovich, who was in this kind of offense last year in Denver before Pat Shurmur took over this year, they didn't need him anymore because they're going to, more of an 11 kind of look. And so Cleveland made a trade for him. So clearly the fingerprints are all over it. We know what Stefanski wants to do. I think this is a matter of, can Cleveland's defense take a step forward? Can Baker not have the turnovers? And if they can play from a lead, there could be enough efficiency for both of those guys to potentially pay off, an ADP. If they're not playing with a lead, I think the guy that it hurts the most is going to be Chubb, because I don't expect to see them both on the field together that much. That means that I expect Hunt to basically get every third series, probably all the 2-minute offense. And if there's a situation where they're just, really trailing, big in the second half of a game, I think you're going to see a lot more Kareem Hunt, and that's going to make Nick Chubb, while still a very good fantasy commodity, I think it's going to make him, a little bit more up and down than what we were used to last year. And you could even see that last year towards, like you said, Drake, towards the end. But I would definitely love to hear, what Mike's thoughts are on it. I mean, I love the offense overall. I am a little worried about the two backs, but that's kind of my thoughts on how it plays out well for both, or for one better than the other.
Yeah, I think you're on the right page on a lot of that. I think that the fact that the Browns, I can't remember if it was Stefanski or Alex Van Pelt said that they actually mentioned Kareem Hunt when talking about their third receiver. I mean, I think that's a good point in the right direction, is that the fact that he could potentially align there, and it makes perfect sense to do so based on his receiving ability and the fact that they have very minimal depth at that position. But keep this in mind, last season, if we're looking at wide receiver packages with 3 or more on the field, Sean McVay led the NFL with the Rams at 79%. Kyle Shanahan was second to last at 46%, while Kevin Stefanski was at 27%, by far, not even close, lowest in the NFL. And you might say, well, okay, Adam Thielen was hurt, and they had no receiver depth, and they had 2 tight ends. Well, guess what? That's exactly how he built this Cleveland Browns offense, right? Yep. You have Beckham, you have Landry, you have almost nothing else at the wide receiver position there. Rashad Higgins, probably the next man up. When Stefanski got to Cleveland, when free agency started, did he go out and spend up on a third receiver? No, he spent up on Austin Hooper. He brought in an impact tight end. They actually drafted a tight end as well to go with David Njoku and Hooper. You have the two backs in Chubb and Hunt, as you mentioned. So that seems to be the scheme. It seems to be carrying over a very similar dynamic for the offense, utilizing the fullback, utilizing the 12 package, and occasionally the 21, as you mentioned. But the only thing I'll say about is this: are they going to be very run heavy like Minnesota was? I don't know, because Mike Zimmer literally had an OC fired because he was not running the ball enough. So was that kind of influenced by Mike Zimmer, the fact that they were so run heavy last season? Maybe, but I think based on how they built this offense, probably worst case scenario is more of a balanced offense or a slightly run first offense. I think that's what it's going to be in Cleveland this season. But look, it was this scheme was fantastic for running backs last season. Top 5 in carries, receptions, touches, yardage, touchdowns, fantasy points. It was terrific for that position. So I don't have too many concerns about Chubb, who's maybe a little bit overdrafted right now. And I really like Kareem Hunt as value.
Would you take Chubb on the turn if you're 112 in a PPR league?
I think that's about where he belongs. He is around 180p. I'm a little lower than that. Aaron Jones is falling around too, which is a head scratcher to me. I don't really understand that. So I still have him ahead. I have Drake and Eckler, Mixon, Jacob, Sanders. I have them all kind of together. I mean, look, Chubb's everything across the board went down when Kareem Hunt came back in the second half last season. His numbers dropped to RB2 territory. So I think he is a borderline RB1. I'm not going to get him much because he's going a pinch earlier than I like him, but he's in the right vicinity.
Yeah, I like him around later. I'd feel so much better about it. It's just, again, it's in that range where it's just like they're paying for that upside plus the known production they know they're going to get. So yeah, I'm with you. I'd like it to be a pinch later.
Speaking of running backs, you can get on the turn. Mike and I are doing this best ball draft we've referenced a few times, and Mike had the number 1 pick. So on that 2-3 turn, with his first pick of the 3rd round, he took Leonard Fournette, the Jacksonville Jaguars running back. They have a new play caller in Jay Gruden, formerly the head coach with the Redskins. So I'd love to talk about your thoughts on Fournette, Chris Thompson being in the mix there. Maybe he's going to steal some receptions. It's an interesting offense with Gardner Minshew and Chark, and then they add Laviska Shenault. So I'd love to get your thoughts on the guys from Duval County.
Yeah, what's interesting about Fournette is his projected point total for me is still 218. That's a very high number, but it's down a lot from 261 last season. And still, that's a number, 218, very respectable. That's still going to put you in that RB1 discussion. I have his carries dropping from 265 to 214. Remember, he missed a game 2 last season. 76 catches last season he had. I don't think many people realize it was that high. I have him at 55. I have his touchdown. Now, keep this in mind. He was one of the unluckiest players of the past decade in the NFL, maybe ever, in the touchdown department. To have, 350 roughly touches and have 3 touchdowns, that's unheard of. It just doesn't happen, and it's not an ability thing. I've done so much work on this in the past. It's all about opportunity. Talent breeds opportunity. Opportunity breeds touchdowns. He had the opportunity. He just had bad luck. It just did not go his way. He's going to regress to the mean. So again, I do expect a pretty substantial drop in touches in Jay Gruden's offense. Gruden's offenses have not been great to the running back position. Yes, Chris Thompson will be mixed in, but he's had a hard time putting together double-digit games in a season, let alone a full season. Right, Paul Armstead is more of a backup. I mean, it should still be the Leonard Fournette show. So getting him in, at the beginning of round 3, I'm perfectly fine with that. I think that's totally reasonable.
Dwayne, you got anything on Jacksonville?
Yeah. I think the price is probably reasonable. I like where Mike's, got him. I'm a little more concerned about potentially Armstead working in as a pass receiver if Thompson goes down. So one interesting thing, like if you're looking back at Jay Gruden, his number 2 running back. So I'm going to give you the target shares to his number 1 runners and his number 2 runners, right, over the last several years. So here's his number 1 runner, starting back in 14 with Washington. 5%, 2%, 3%, 5, 5, 5. Those are the percentages he's thrown to his number 2.
That doesn't seem good.
That's not good. To his number 2 back. He gets his number 2 back involved in the passing game as much or more than anybody in the league. And so I adjusted this on a per game basis. Again, had to play at least 8 games, but 16%, 16%, 15%, 10, 10, and 10. So I think there's a real plan for Thompson. I agree with Mike that, can the guy stay healthy? And I think in the right doses, maybe he can. It seems like Washington always end up having to try to lean on him more than, they really wanted to, because of the way the game scripts and everything would work out. But I do believe there's a real plan there, and there's been some talk about Armstead, as a receiver. So that's the one thing. So I have my projection on Fournette a smidge lower on the receptions. I'm right around the 40 mark, but at the same time, like my overall projection for Fournette, would you say, Mike, you're like right around 215 or so?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're still in the same, ballpark. Right. And so it's a type of deal where I expect Jay Gruden to run a better offense as well. And so to Mike's point, I think that's going to lead to, some additional opportunities, for Fournette from a touchdown standpoint. And again, he already mentioned, regression. But if you look at last year, Fournette only had 8 attempts inside the 5. Right. So that's really not very good. Like we talked about Kansas City a minute ago, they had 17 between their running backs. Right. It's not that they're going to turn into that, but if you look at Indy, they had 12, 18, 19 between their running backs. So, I mean, they just were not inside the 5 where Leonard Fournette makes his money. So they just need the offense to get a little better, be down in that range. And I don't think Jay Gruden will be afraid to use him because he's got the talent, to be effective there.
Yeah, I do want to follow up on that, though. 2 things. First of all, I have him his expected touchdown total was just under 9.5. That was 10th most at running back. So I'm with you. You want to see more carries inside the 5, but the overall volume suggested he should have been closer to double-digit touchdowns. So definitely a lot of bad luck. And as for Gruden's lead backs, the only thing I'll say is, and again, sometimes we need context on all of these numbers, but if you look at those lead backs, they're guys that have never really been factors as pass catchers. And so I think it was personnel based. I mean, it was Adrian Peterson. The last couple of years was his top ball carrier. Again, didn't matter who his coach was. He's never really been a standout. Maybe one season mixed in there as a receiver. Samaje Perine, Alfred Morris, Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis, it's just Rob Kelly was one of them. Cedric Benson way back in his first year in 2011. I think actually everybody I listed was not really a standout pass catcher. And then you had like a Gio Bernard, who we saw him kind of flourish at times as a receiver, even when he was the lead back for a brief time. So I think that was a little bit of a factor there. And I do think Fournette is good enough as a receiver that they probably want him out there more so than Chris Thompson. But again, they did sign Thompson. I'm sure they'll try to work him into some capacity. That's why I have his numbers dropping pretty substantially in that department. But again, when you add the pieces together, I still think there's a path to an RB1 season for Fournette.
How about, we were mentioning the Redskins. Let's talk about Darius Geis. He got hurt last year. It was unfortunate, ripped off a couple of big runs in the preseason. I think there, everyone in fantasy has this recency bias because they look at what have you done for me lately? And they're going to look at Darius Geis and they're going to be like, I don't know anything about this guy. The casual home league guy is going to completely forget Darius Geis exists. What do you think he's going to do this year for the Redskins on a team that probably won't be very good and is going to be trailing in a lot of games?
Yeah, I'm worried, right? I mean, it's a new regime here, so they have no reason. He's not in scholarship, essentially. He doesn't even have to be the lead back. Now, I will say this, obviously a ton of talent, ton of pedigree coming into the league, and he was pretty good last season. He averaged almost 6 yards per carry, so the sample was small, but he was an effective player. But you draft Antonio Gibson and immediately start comparing him to essentially a Christian McCaffrey role. How much is he going to play? Could he be their lead back at some point this season? It's possible if he's the real deal. You still have Adrian Peterson in the mix. Bryce Love, was he a better prospect before his injury than Darius Geis? I think most would agree. He had that one season where he was just off the charts. It looked like he was going to be the next NFL superstar. So he's healthy. He's back in the mix there as well. They also signed J.D. McKissick. Peyton Barber's there. Not all these guys are going to make this team or be factors, but there are a lot of mouths to feed essentially in this offense, and it should be a fairly open competition. So not in love with them. I haven't gotten any Geis shares so far this offseason. The talent's there. He's a fine mid to late round flyer, but I think he's just too expensive right now.
Dwayne, what are we doing in Carolina with Matt Rule, Joe Brady coming in to run the show, a couple of college guys? And you've got the number one player in fantasy in Christian McCaffrey. Almost nobody debates that. He's going off the board number one. We don't exactly know the offense that he's going to be in. Maybe we do, if we look kind of back at what Rule did in school. But what are you expecting from these guys in this Carolina offense? They've got a bunch of good receivers. They just added Robbie Anderson. I'm no Teddy Bridgewater fan. I said whoever signs Teddy Bridgewater is going to be looking for a new quarterback in a year or two. So what are we going to make of this Carolina offense, guys?
Yeah, I think it's a tough one, right? But I think if you look at, the best we can, because I don't, and Mike may have better data from a college standpoint. I just have to go back and literally, I try to cobble it together the best I can, but I don't have like a database like I have for the guys in the NFL that I can track back to. But, from what I pulled together around it, both of those guys, in their offenses, run a lot of 11, personnel. If I look at, the way that this offense is set up, I think about Robbie Anderson, Curtis Samuel, DJ Moore, obviously, Ian Thomas is a tight end that could be, on the come still. And then you think about McCaffrey. I still think, they're going to be set up to run a lot of 11. I think they're also a team that's rebuilding. So they're going to be trailing. So they're going to need to throw the ball, some more. So that's the way I'm leaning right now on them is, I've got them up around 60% pass, and a lot of it those due just to what I think is going to happen to them as far as, what the way the game scripts are going to be working. But when you pair that with the talent and the fact that you've got these weapons that you can distribute the ball to, I just see a very, very heavy pass, season. I think Teddy Bridgewater could, I don't see him being super hyper efficient, but I mean, these are pretty good receivers, but I think he's a guy that's going to probably give us more passing volume than what most people, are expecting. So, I mean, I think he'll be a fine guy that you could easily stream, or he could be your QB2 and pay off for you like in a best ball type situation.
What do you feel about the Panthers, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, honestly, when talking about scheme, they may be the worst team to talk about, right? I mean, there's only two projected play callers that have not called a game in the NFL. Tim Kelly for the Texans has taken over for Bill O'Brien as the play caller, and Joe Brady for the Panthers. So there's not much to be learned here. I'm with you. I think there are going to be a lot of 3 receiver sets, maybe 4 wide receiver sets at times there in this offense. They're going to try and be fast-paced. The defense is atrocious on paper, and, I hate to use that word, but they're rebuilding. There are a lot of young players. It's going to take time for them to be an effective unit. So it could lead to a lot of second half deficit. So I'm with you there. I mean, Teddy, not too attractive to me in fantasy. He's not going to do much in terms of scrambling, but I do have him with 563 dropbacks in 13 games this season. I'm not sure he's going to be one of the guys that plays in 16 games based on the fact that I don't think he's a difference maker at that position, and perhaps they'll give someone else like PJ Walker a shot. And obviously durability has been problematic for him in the past. So not overly pumped about this offense in fantasy. Ian Thomas going too high for me. I'd rather take a higher ceiling flyer later. McCaffrey first overall is great. Obviously I like that. Robbie Anderson, Curtis Samuel, fine. Flyers later, DJ Moore's fine. So really, I'm looking at the receivers here and McCaffrey. Otherwise, I'm pretty much going to stay away.
In Atlanta, this is a team last year that was besieged by injuries. They were behind in a ton of games. Matt Ryan was throwing the ball all over the place. Everybody now in 2020 is on the Calvin Ridley train. You see him across the industry. He is the breakout player of the year. Get on Calvin Ridley. So I want to get your thoughts on him. You have him inside your top 20 at wide receiver. This is a team, again, without much of a pass rush, whose corners are susceptible. They're going to give up points, and they're going to have to throw. So I'd love to get your thoughts on those guys. And I'm a huge Hayden Hurst guy, maybe giving away a little intel for our best ball draft. But I think Hayden Hurst is going to be a top 5 tight end in fantasy in 2020.
Yeah, well, let's start there. Tight ends in Dirk Cutter's offenses since 2010 are averaging 8.1 touchdowns per game. That's a huge number for a tight end, 8.1, and that's the average for that position. So, and by the way, that's not just like Tony Gonzalez back in the day, right? That's not just Austin Hooper, I mean, he's probably going to take a big step back. It's not like he was this incredibly high pedigree pass catching prospect coming in. He's just a well-rounded guy. But we're talking about Jacksonville. We're talking about 2 stops in Atlanta. We're talking about a stop in Tampa Bay for Cutter as well. He has gotten a lot out of that position. So I totally understand that. I'm with you there as a borderline tight end one there. Otherwise, Cutter he's very experienced. He's called 193 games since 2007. He's second behind only Josh McDaniels in that category. Very, very reliant on the passing game. He's been near the top of the league in dropbacks most seasons, pass attempts, completions, passing yardage. Matt Ryan's had some of his best seasons under Dirk Cutter. We saw a lot of production from Jameis Winston in that Buccaneers offense there. So I still, Julio Jones, top 5 wide receiver. I think the Ridley hype's a little bit excessive right now. Look, even last season, you're hearing like he's the next Chris Godwin. Well, even last season, Ridley was our wide receiver 14 before he got injured. So it's not like he was performing with Godwin last year. He got hurt, and now he's just right back to Godwin territory. You're kind of expecting another leap forward, and that's possible. I think there's a lot of talent. He was a first-round player, but I'm at just under 80 catches, a little over 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. That makes him a fine wide receiver two target, maybe mid to back end wide receiver 2 target. Go for it. But I think the hype's probably a little bit, people are reaching a little bit too far in him right now. But how about Russell Gage? I just talked up the pass offense. Love him as a late round flyer.
What do you think on these Falcons, Dwayne?
Man, I think Mike hit it on the head. If you look at the time that Cotter's had with, Matt Ryan last year, 65% pass. Now they were also, getting beat a lot. They only led on 25% of their plays. But then you go back to 14, 13, and 12, 63% pass, just looking at attempts, right? 67%, 62%. So you're going to have the volume, and that's the main thing. So I think that makes all the options viable. Obviously, Julio is the one. And I think that's also what gives folks some hope around Ridley. If he could, carve out, a few more percentage points, from a target share standpoint, I think I have him right now at like 19 or 20% projected, but who says he couldn't get to 22 or 23%? I think it's possible he could grow into that. And when you have such a high volume offense and you've got a good quarterback to go along with it, not that that's necessarily a huge driver for fantasy points, but it never hurts, especially from a consistency standpoint. I think that's where, people are getting hyped. I do agree with Mike. Like, we were all over the Godwin thing way early last year. I don't consider this to be like a sure shot like Godwin, right? I mean, people are drawing too many lines there. The thing I like, though, is overall, most of the drafts that I've done so far, which I haven't done a ton, he's not shooting up the boards yet. I think that could be about to happen with all of this talk. That's been the thing on Twitter. Oh, it's the next Godwin. So we'll see what happens to his ADP. But if his ADP stays where it's at, I'm very much in line with Mike. I think it's fine. It's a great wide receiver too. I've got him right around 80 catches as well, right around 1,000 yards. So, and I think he does have some upside from there. And I don't think there's a ton of downside. So I feel really good about the pick.
2 things I gleaned from Mike's article, the Rams and the Saints. Play caller matters. You have great play callers. You have fantasy studs. Everybody shines in these offenses. Any other teams, Dwayne, that you wanted to touch on while we have Mike with us?
Man, I think we've hit on most of them. I did want to get his thoughts on the Chargers because that's a team that I haven't done yet. I haven't got to look at them. They've got a new coordinator. It's not somebody that I've studied. So be interested in seeing what his thoughts are there with Tyrod Taylor and then potentially a rookie quarterback, as well as, what we saw from, I don't even know if I'm saying it right, Mike, Shane Steichen, or is it Steichen?
Yeah, no, I think you got it there, Steichen, I think. But,
okay, Steichen.
Again, it's a small sample, right? So we don't want to go too nuts here, but they were a pass-heavy offense last season before they made the decision to fire Ken Whisenhunt. After that, they were very run-heavy. So they went from very pass-heavy to very run-heavy, much like the Vikings the year before, right, when they made the change at coordinator to Stefanski late in the season. But what was really interesting is that not only were they run-heavy, 35% of their passes went to the running back position. That is a huge number. And that should probably make you feel a little bit better if you're thinking about Austin Eckler at that round 1-2 turn, and not to mention taking a shot on, a Josh Kelly or Justin Jackson later in your draft. So they were, that second half of the season with Steichen, they were near the top of the NFL in terms of running back fantasy points, yards per catch, pretty much any receiving category. They were up there near the top. Also, the passing efficiency was pretty good. Phillip Rivers, 7th in YPA, 12th in completion rate with Steichen as the play caller as well. Receivers were number 1 in ADOT during that stretch, 6th in yards per target. They didn't get a lot of volume, but the efficiency was good. Now you move away from Rivers, a pocket quarterback, to a scrambler in Tyrod Taylor. I think they're going to run the ball as much as they can, lean on what is a very good defense. You're going to see a lot of involvement with Eckler, a pretty high target share there for Keenan Allen. Overall, I think it's going to be, I don't think they're going to be a high scoring offense. Tyrod Taylor is a bottom tier starting NFL quarterback right now, essentially a game manager. He'll take a lot of sacks. He does not turn the football over, but he's not going to get you a ton of big plays and a huge passing game. So don't really love him long-term for the team, but and certainly not a huge fan for fantasy, but maybe he can hold down the fort here for Justin Herbert for a little while.
He won't be a great selection in the Scott Fish Bowl with the rules they have over there for quarterbacks. And speaking of the Scott Fish Bowl, that's actually in a roundabout way. I met Mike Clay last year. He and I shared a flight to the Kings Classic in Canton, Ohio. He was sitting a few rows in front of me. We get off the plane. I've got my Scott Fish Bowl shirt on. He's like, "Hey, nerd, you've got a fantasy football shirt on. Like, are you here for this draft?" I'm like, "Oh, you don't know who I am?" But no, and the nicest guy ever. We shared an Uber. We went out, had some beers, had some lunch, had a blast shooting the shit with Mike and Ryan McDowell and the guys from Dynasty League Football and all the guys at the Kings Classic. Unfortunately, they're not going to have it live this year. Maybe next year we'll get back out and do that kind of thing. But it is Father's Day, Mike. I know you're a dad. Dwayne, you are too. Happy Father's Day to you guys. And
you too, man.
Anything,
You too.
Yeah. Anything final you want to say, Mike, to get out of here? Anything you want to plug? Like people don't know who
I
you
would
are.
just say, I mean, I didn't call you nerd, but if I did, it's a term of endearment. So, I'm right there with you. So it's all love in the football nerd world.
There you go. And he's a good beer guy too. So we'll talk some beer offline, and I'll send him some more Southern Tier Pumpkin. Hands down, the best pumpkin beer made in America, made here in New York State. But
that's pretty good.
Yeah. So for Dwayne McFarland, Mike Clay of ESPN, I am Brian Drake, Fighting Chance Fantasy. Thanks everybody for hustling with us. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Rate, review, everything on iTunes. You know the drill. We'll see you next week. Never get out hustled, my friends. Take it easy.